Picture this, a tiny nation, smaller than the state of Indiana, with barely 1 million people, suddenly controls half the known world. No massive armies, no industrial revolution, just wooden ships, stars, and an obsession that would make them the first true global empire. While everyone was looking at Spain, France, and England, Portugal was quietly writing the blueprint for the modern world. This is the story of how a kingdom on the edge of Europe became the center of everything, and why you've probably never heard the full story. But before we dive into this incredible journey, if you love untold history that changes everything you thought you knew, smash that subscribe button and hit the like. Trust me, what you're about to discover will blow your mind. I want you to imagine something for a moment. Close your eyes if you're not driving. It's the year 1400. You're standing on the westernmost point of Europe in Portugal, staring at the Atlantic Ocean. Behind you, the entire known world. Ahead of you, absolutely nothing. Just endless water that, according to every map, every scholar, every sailor who's ever lived, leads to either the edge of the world or monsters so terrifying that even thinking about them makes grown men weep. Now imagine being the person who says, "You know what? I'm going to sail into that anyway." That's exactly what Portugal did. And in doing so, this tiny nation, and I mean tiny, we're talking about a country smaller than the state of Indiana, with a population that could fit into modern-day Philadelphia, became the world's first global empire. Not through massive armies, not through technological superiority in warfare, but through something far more powerful, the audacity to believe that the impossible was just difficult. Welcome to the story of the silent revolution that gave Portugal the world. But before we embark on this incredible journey through uncharted waters and undiscovered lands, do me a favor. If you're the kind of person who loves history that doesn't just recite dates, but reveals how the world actually works, hit that subscribe button right now. And smash the like button, because what you're about to hear is going to fundamentally change how you see the modern world. I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand why your morning coffee, the words you speak, and even the route you take on Google Maps all trace back to Portuguese sailors who decided to ignore everyone telling them no. All right, let's go. Here's something they don't teach you in school. Portugal didn't explore the world because they were curious. They explored because they were desperate. Let me paint the picture. It's the early 1400s. Portugal has just finished kicking out the Moors after centuries of reconquista. The country is broke, devastated, and geographically, it's in the worst possible position. You see, all the wealth of Europe flows through the Mediterranean. Spices from Asia, silk from China, gold from Africa. It all comes through Constantinople, Venice, and Genoa. These Italian city-states have a total monopoly on trade with the East, and Portugal is on the edge. Literally. They're facing the Atlantic with their backs to the rest of Europe. The Mediterranean trade routes completely closed to them. The land routes to Asia, controlled by the Ottoman Empire, which has exactly zero interest in letting Christian Europeans waltz through their territory. So Portugal has a choice: stay poor and irrelevant, or find another way. Enter one of history's most underrated geniuses, Prince Henry the Navigator. Now, despite his name, Henry never actually navigated anything himself. He never went on a single voyage. But what he did was far more important. He created the world's first research and development institution for maritime exploration at Sagres, on the southwestern tip of Portugal. Think about this for a second. While the rest of Europe was focused on internal squabbles and crusades, Henry gathered mathematicians, astronomers, cartographers, and shipbuilders from all over the known world. Christians, Muslims, Jews, it didn't matter. And he gave them one mission: figure out how to sail beyond where anyone has ever sailed before. This wasn't just ambition, this was survival. Portugal had no choice but to innovate or die. And here's the kicker. They didn't just want to find a new trade route. They wanted to circumvent the entire Mediterranean monopoly. They wanted to sail around Africa, reach India directly, and cut out all the middlemen. It was insane. It was impossible. Every expert said so, but impossible just meant hasn't been done yet. Now you can't just wish yourself across an ocean. You need technology. And this is where Portugal's genius really shows. The ships of the Mediterranean were great for calm seas, short distances, and coastal trading. But the Atlantic is a monster. Unpredictable winds, massive waves, storms that appear out of nowhere. Mediterranean ships would be destroyed in days. So the Portuguese invented something new, the caravel. I know, it doesn't sound exciting. It's just a boat, right? Wrong. The caravel was to the 15th century what the smartphone was to the 21st. It was a complete game changer. Here's why. The caravel had a revolutionary hull design that was both lightweight and incredibly sturdy. It could sail closer to the wind than any ship before it, meaning it could travel against the wind, something that sounds obvious now, but was revolutionary then. It had lateen sails borrowed from Arabic ships that gave it unprecedented maneuverability. But most importantly, it was small enough to explore rivers and coastlines, yet strong enough to cross oceans. This meant Portuguese sailors could hug the African coast, explore every inlet, every river mouth, mapping everything as they went, and then sail back against the prevailing winds. No other nation could do this. Then there was navigation. You have to understand, sailing out of sight of land was essentially suicide before the Portuguese refined their techniques. How do you know where you are when there's nothing but water in every direction? The Portuguese took the astrolabe, an ancient instrument used by astronomers, and adapted it for maritime navigation. They created detailed tables that allowed sailors to calculate their latitude by measuring the angle of the sun or the North Star above the horizon. They systematically recorded wind patterns, currents, and coastlines, creating the most accurate maps the world had ever seen. And here's what's crucial. They kept it secret. This wasn't information they shared. This was classified state intelligence. Portuguese captains sailed with sealed orders. Maps were state secrets. If you were caught sharing Portuguese navigation techniques with foreign powers, it was treason punishable by death. Think about that. While other nations were fighting wars with swords and cannons, Portugal was winning with information and technology. They were creating an empire of knowledge. But technology alone doesn't make you brave. And make no mistake, what Portuguese sailors did required insane amounts of courage. Let me tell you about Cape Bojador. Cape Bojador is a headland on the coast of West Africa, in what's now Western Sahara. Today it's nothing, completely unremarkable. But in the early 1400s, Cape Bojador was the edge of the world. Beyond Cape Bojador, the sea was said to boil. The sun would turn you black. Sea monsters would devour your ship. The currents would drag you into a watery abyss from which there was no return. These weren't just superstitions. These were the accepted facts of the age, believed by scholars, sailors, and the church. For 12 years, Prince Henry sent expedition after expedition to pass Cape Bojador. 12 years, every single one turned back. The psychological barrier was too great. Then, in 1434, a young captain named Gil Inez decided to try something different. Instead of sailing close to the coast, where the currents and rocks were dangerous, he sailed out into the open ocean, gave the cape a wide berth, and then came back to the coast on the other side. And you know what he found? Nothing. No boiling seas, no monsters, just more coastline. That moment, that single voyage, shattered a psychological barrier that had held humanity back for centuries. Inez proved that the myths were just myths, that fear was the only real obstacle. After Cape Bojador, Portuguese exploration accelerated exponentially. Every year they went farther. Every voyage brought back new knowledge, new resources, new possibilities. They reached Senegal, then Sierra Leone, then the Gold Coast, where they found so much gold. that it literally changed the European economy. They established trading posts, built relationships with African kingdoms, and kept pushing south. The question that drove them was simple. How far does Africa go? Does it ever end? And if it ends, what's on the other side? It took decades to find out, but they never stopped trying. Now let's talk about why they were doing all this. What was worth this level of effort, risk, and investment? 2 words: black pepper. I'm serious. Today, you have a shaker of black pepper on your table and you barely think about it. But in the 15th century, pepper was worth more than gold. Literally. Spices were the most valuable commodity in the world. Why? Because in medieval Europe, food was boring and often spoiled. There was no refrigeration. Meat had to be heavily salted to preserve it, which made it nearly inedible without something to mask the taste. Spices didn't just make food taste better, they made it edible. They were also used in medicine, religious ceremonies, and as a display of wealth. And all of it, every single peppercorn, came from Asia, specifically from India and the spice islands of Indonesia. The route these spices took was insane. They'd be grown in Asia, transported by Arab traders across the Indian Ocean, carried by caravan through the Middle East, sold to Venetian merchants in Constantinople or Alexandria, shipped across the Mediterranean, and finally sold to the rest of Europe at markup rates that would make modern drug cartels jealous. By the time pepper reached northern Europe, it had passed through so many middlemen that it cost more than its weight in silver. Venice and Genoa became fabulously wealthy just by controlling this trade. Portugal wanted to break that monopoly. They wanted to sail directly to India, buy spices at the source, and cut out every single middleman. The problem? They had to sail around Africa, and nobody knew if that was even possible, until Vasco da Gama. In 1497, Vasco da Gama left Lisbon with 4 ships and a mission: reach India by sea. The voyage took him down the coast of Africa, farther than any European had gone before. He rounded the Cape of Good Hope, sailed up the east coast of Africa, crossed the Indian Ocean with the help of an Arab navigator, and in May 1498 he landed in Calicut, India. Let me emphasize what a big deal this was. Vasco da Gama had done what everyone said was impossible. He had sailed from Europe to Asia without using any Mediterranean ports, any Ottoman-controlled land routes, or any Venetian middlemen. When he returned to Portugal in 1499, his ships were loaded with spices. And even though he'd lost half his crew and 2 of his ships, the profits from that single voyage paid for the expedition 60 times over. 60 times. Suddenly, Portugal controlled a direct route to the source of the world's most valuable commodities. The economic implications were staggering. Venice's monopoly was shattered overnight. The balance of power in Europe shifted. Portugal, this tiny kingdom on the edge of Europe, was now the richest nation in the world. Lisbon transformed into the spice capital of Europe. Merchants from all over the continent flocked there. The Portuguese crown's income increased by 800% in just a few decades. They built monuments, churches, and palaces that still stand today, all financed by pepper, cinnamon, and cloves. But here's where it gets even crazier. While Portugal was focused on reaching India, they accidentally stumbled upon an entirely different empire. In the year 1500, Pedro Álvares Cabral was leading a fleet to India, following Vasco da Gama's route. But Cabral swung wide into the Atlantic. Some say to catch better winds, others say he was following secret orders, and he ended up hitting land that wasn't supposed to be there. He had discovered Brazil. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether this was actually an accident. Some historians think Portugal knew about Brazil already, and Cabral's deviation was a cover story. The Treaty of Tordesillas, signed in 1494 between Portugal and Spain, had divided the entire unknown world between them along a north-south line. And conveniently, Brazil fell on Portugal's side of that line. Either way, Portugal now claimed the largest territory in South America, a land of unimaginable resources: gold, diamonds, Brazil wood, sugar, and later, coffee and rubber. Think about the scope of this. At its height, the Portuguese Empire stretched from Brazil in the west to Japan in the east. They had trading posts and colonies in Africa, India, Southeast Asia, China, and South America. They controlled the Atlantic slave trade, the spice trade, and the routes between continents. A nation of 1 million people controlled territory and trade routes that affected hundreds of millions. This wasn't just an empire. This was the first truly global empire in human history. But we can't talk about Portuguese exploration without confronting its darkest chapter: slavery. Portugal didn't invent slavery. Slavery had existed for millennia across every civilization. But Portugal industrialized it. They systematized it. They turned it into the engine of global commerce. It started in the 1440s when Portuguese ships began raiding the West African coast and bringing back enslaved people. By 1444, the first slave market in Europe opened in Lagos, Portugal. This wasn't small scale. We're talking about hundreds, then thousands, then eventually millions of human beings bought, sold, and transported across the Atlantic. The Portuguese established the Atlantic triangular trade, manufactured goods from Europe to Africa, enslaved people from Africa to the Americas, and raw materials from the Americas back to Europe. This system would persist for over 400 years and would transport an estimated 12 million Africans across the Atlantic, with Portugal responsible for nearly half of that number. Brazil became the largest destination for enslaved Africans in history. The sugar plantations, the gold mines, the coffee farms, all built on enslaved labor. The wealth that flowed back to Portugal, that built those beautiful monuments and churches, was stained with this horrific trade. And here's what's important to understand. This wasn't a side effect of exploration. This was central to the economic model. The empire's profitability depended on it. I'm telling you this not to vilify Portugal specifically. Every European colonial power engaged in slavery, but because we can't sanitize history. The same ships that carried spices and maps also carried human beings in chains. The same navigational genius that connected the world also enabled one of humanity's greatest atrocities. The legacy of this is still with us. The racial dynamics of Brazil, the Caribbean, and parts of Africa today are directly tied to Portuguese colonialism and the slave trade. The cultural mixing, the languages, the social hierarchies, all of it traces back to this period. History is complicated. The same exploration that brought innovation and global connection also brought unspeakable suffering. We have to hold both truths at once. But there's another legacy of Portuguese exploration that's often overlooked: cultural fusion. See, unlike some other colonial powers, the Portuguese were chronic mixers. They intermarried with local populations everywhere they went. They adopted local customs, foods, and practices, and in return they spread their language, religion, and culture across the globe. Today, Portuguese is the official language of 9 countries and spoken by over 250 million people worldwide. It's the most spoken language in the Southern Hemisphere. From Brazil to Mozambique to East Timor, Portuguese serves as a linguistic bridge connecting vastly different cultures. But the influence goes way beyond language. Let me give you some examples that'll blow your mind. Tempura, that Japanese fried food that's absolutely delicious? That's Portuguese. Portuguese missionaries in Japan in the 16th century introduced the concept of batter frying food during Lent, when they couldn't eat meat but could eat fish. The Japanese adapted it, perfected it, and now it's considered quintessentially Japanese. Vindaloo, the spicy Indian curry. The name comes from the Portuguese dish carne de vinha d'alhos, meat marinated in wine and garlic. Portuguese traders in Goa mixed their cooking techniques with Indian spices, and vindaloo was born. Chili peppers in Thai food, tomatoes in Italian pasta, potatoes in Irish stew. All of these ingredients traveled the world on Portuguese ships. The Portuguese were the first to bring Chinese tea to Europe, Japanese folding screens to Brazil, African music to the Americas. They created the conditions for what we now call globalization. And genetically, the Portuguese left their mark everywhere. In Goa, Macau, Brazil, Cape Verde, and countless other places, you see the physical evidence of this mixing. Whole new ethnic groups emerged. Luso-Africans, Luso-Asians, mixed populations that created entirely new cultures. Some people see this as cultural imperialism, and there's truth to that. The Portuguese often destroyed indigenous cultures, forced conversions to Christianity, and imposed their language by force. But others see it as the beginning of the modern, multicultural world. The Portuguese proved that people from completely different backgrounds could mix, create, and build new societies together. The reality, as always, is complex. Both things are true. So here we are. We've journeyed from the cliffs of Sagres to the spice markets of Calicut, from the accidental discovery of Brazil to the dark holds of slave ships, from technological innovation to cultural revolution. Portugal's silent revolution gave us the modern world. The good, the bad, and everything in between. The ships that connected continents, the trade routes that became highways of culture, the mixing of peoples that created new identities, the maps that turned the unknown into the known, and yes, the systems of exploitation that we're still reckoning with today. This tiny nation on the edge of Europe changed everything, and most people don't even know the story. But now you do. And here's what I want to know from you. What surprised you most? Was it the technology, the scale of the empire, the cultural impact, or maybe the darker chapters that don't get talked about enough? Drop a comment below and let me know. And here's an even better question. What empire's untold story should we cover next? The Mongols, the Ottomans, the Mali Empire, the Dutch? There are so many incredible stories that textbooks gloss over. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history that actually matters, hit that subscribe button right now. We're building a community of people who want to understand not just what happened, but why it matters today. History isn't dead. It's alive in every language we speak, every food we eat, every route we take. And of course, smash that like button. It helps more people discover these stories. Because here's the thing, the Portuguese didn't just explore the world. They proved that the only limits are the ones we accept. That impossible is just another word for hasn't been done yet. That a tiny nation with big dreams and bold action can literally change the course of human history. So what's your impossible? What's your Cape Bojador? What myth are you going to sail past? Think about it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one, where we'll uncover another piece of history that changes everything. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and never accept that the world is smaller than you can imagine.